At 46, Ethan Cole had spent over 2 decades keeping his company afloat while raising his teenage daughter alone. He was the man people relied on when things fell apart, but never the man of public acclaim. Then, one cold Tuesday, young CEO Vivian Hale called him into his office and revealed a harsh truth. A powerful executive was preparing to push him out, slowly and politely, until he disappeared without a fight. It wasn't just about work anymore. It was about dignity, legacy, and the lesson his daughter would learn watching him rise again. If you enjoyed this story, please hit like and comment the city you're viewing so I know how far my story has come. The fluorescent lights in the executive hallway buzzed like dying insects. Ethan Cole walked slowly toward Vivian Hale's office, his leather briefcase hanging from one hand, the weight of 23 years pressing down on his shoulders. It was 4:47 on a Tuesday afternoon in late November, and outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city was already drowning in early darkness. He didn't know why she'd called him in. The email had been brief. "Can you come by my office at 4:45? V. Vivian was 32, sharp as a scalpel, and had been running the company for less than 2 years. She respected Ethan in the way you respect a grandfather clock. Reliable, elegant, slightly out of place in a world of digital timers. She never dismissed him outright, but she also never invited him into the inner circle where the real decisions got made. He knocked twice. "Come in." Vivian sat behind her glass desk, backlit by the gray skyline. Her expression was unreadable. She gestured to the chair across from her. "Close the door." Ethan did. The click of the latch felt louder than it should have. "Sit down, Ethan." He sat. His hands rested on his knees. He didn't fidget. He'd learned a long time ago that stillness made people think you were calm, even when your heart was hammering. Vivian leaned forward, folding her hands together. For a moment, she just looked at him. Not unkindly, not warmly either. "I'm going to tell you something," she said quietly, "and I need you to listen without interrupting." "All right." "Richard Crane is planning to push you out." The name landed like a stone in his chest. Richard Crane, Executive Vice President of Operations. A man who smiled like a politician and spoke in boardroom parables. A man who'd been with the company for 7 years and already had half the C-suite in his pocket. Ethan exhaled slowly. "When?" "He's been laying groundwork for 3 months. He hasn't said your name directly, but he's been talking about legacy staff, generational turnover, efficiency realignment. He's building a case." "For what?" "For making you obsolete." The word hung in the air between them. Obsolete. Like a machine that had stopped being useful. Like something you threw away without guilt because it had simply run its course. Ethan's jaw tightened. "I've saved this company more times than most people here even know about." "I know. I've stopped fires, fixed broken deals, kept clients from walking." "I know, Ethan." Vivian's voice was steady. "That's why I'm telling you this. Because if I don't, you won't see it coming until it's too late." He looked at her carefully. "Why are you warning me?" She didn't answer right away. She stood, walked to the window, and stared out at the skyline. The city stretched out below them, cold and indifferent. "Because Richard Crane is a brilliant operator," she said finally. "But he doesn't understand what holds this place together. He sees spreadsheets, timelines, org charts. He doesn't see the invisible work, the kind you do." "Then stop him." "I can't." She turned back to face him. "Not directly. He has board support. And if I go to war with him over you, I'll lose. And then we'll both be out." Ethan felt something cold settle in his stomach. "So what are you saying?" "I'm saying if you want to survive this, you're going to have to fight for yourself. And you're going to have to do it smarter than he does." She walked back to her desk and pulled out a thin folder. She slid it across to him. "That's everything I know. His talking points, the people he's been meeting with, the narrative he's building." Ethan opened the folder. Inside were printed emails, meeting notes, bullet points that painted a picture of a man being slowly erased. Ethan Cole, strong historical contributor, but limited adaptability to new systems. Recommend phase transition to advisory role 6-month timeline. Identify internal candidates for operational continuity. He read it twice. Then he closed the folder and looked up at Vivian. "Why should I fight this?" he asked quietly. "Maybe they're right. Maybe I am past my prime. Vivian's expression hardened. Don't do that. Do what? Give up before the fight even starts. She leaned forward, her voice dropping. You think I don't know what you've done here? You think I haven't noticed that every time something goes sideways, you're the one who fixes it while everyone else is still figuring out how to schedule the meeting? You're not past anything, Ethan. You're just surrounded by people who've forgotten how much they need you. He looked down at the folder again. The words blurred slightly. What do I do? You prove them wrong. You make it impossible to ignore what you're worth. And you do it before Richard gets enough momentum to make the decision inevitable. Ethan stood. He picked up the folder and tucked it under his arm. Thank you, he said. Vivian nodded. Don't thank me yet. This is going to get ugly. He left her office and walked back down the hallway. The fluorescent lights still buzzed. The building was emptying out. People heading home, heading to happy hour, heading anywhere but here. He passed Richard Crane's office. The door was closed, but through the glass he could see Richard on the phone, laughing at something, gesturing with his free hand like he was conducting an orchestra. Ethan kept walking. The apartment was dark when he got home. He flipped the light switch in the kitchen and set his briefcase on the counter. The clock on the microwave said 6:32. Chloe? In here. He found her in the living room, stretched out on the couch with her laptop balanced on her stomach. She was 17, sharp-eyed with her mother's dark hair and his stubborn streak. She didn't look up. How was school? He asked. Fine. Homework done? Most of it. He sat down in the armchair across from her. She finally glanced over. You look like hell, she said. Thanks. Seriously, what happened? He hesitated. He'd never been good at lying to her, and she'd inherited an uncomfortable talent for reading people. Work stuff, he said. What kind of work stuff? The kind that'll work itself out. She closed her laptop and sat up. Dad, come on. He rubbed his face. There's a guy at the office who wants to get rid of me. Fire you? Not fire. Ease me out. Make me disappear quietly. Chloe frowned. Can he do that? If I let him. She stared at him for a long moment. Then she said, So don't let him. It's not that simple. Why not? Because he's got influence. He's got support. And I'm just... He stopped himself. Just what? Just tired, Chloe. She stood up and walked over to him. She crouched down so they were eye level. You know what Mom used to say? He looked at her. What? That you were the guy who never quit, even when things were falling apart, even when it hurt. Her voice softened. So don't start now. Something shifted in his chest. He reached out and put a hand on her shoulder. When did you get so smart? I've always been smart. You just don't listen. He smiled faintly. Fair. She stood and picked up her laptop. I'm going to finish my homework. You should eat something. Yeah. She paused in the doorway. Dad? Yeah? Don't let them push you around. He nodded. She disappeared down the hall. Ethan sat there in the quiet for a long time. Then he stood, walked over to the kitchen table, and opened the folder Vivian had given him. He spread the pages out in front of him and started reading. He read every word, every bullet point, every coded reference to his age, his methods, his usefulness. And as he read, something cold and sharp began to form inside him. This wasn't just about survival. This was about dignity, about proving that experience wasn't a liability, about showing his daughter that when someone tried to erase you, you didn't just accept it. You fought back. The next morning, Ethan arrived at the office early. The building was still half empty, the hum of the HVAC system the only sound. He went straight to his desk and pulled up the company's internal database. He started with the numbers. Over the last 5 years, Ethan had been involved in 47 major projects. He'd led 23 of them. He started building a spreadsheet, pulling data from old reports, client emails, project summaries. Revenue saved. Disasters averted. Contracts salvaged. The Pembroke deal, $3 million, on the verge of collapse when the client threatened to walk. Ethan had flown to Atlanta, sat in a hotel conference room for 6 hours, and rebuilt the relationship from scratch. The deal closed 2 weeks later. The Harmon crisis, a product defect that could have cost the company 8 figures in lawsuits. Ethan had worked with legal, operations, and PR to contain the damage before it metastasized. Total cost, $400,000. Potential cost without intervention, $80 million. The Riviera account, a partnership that had gone cold after the original account manager left. Ethan had quietly taken it over, nursed the relationship back to life, and turned it into one of the company's top 10 revenue streams. He documented everything: numbers, dates, outcomes, proof. By 9 a.m., he had 12 pages of data. By 10 a.m., he'd cross-referenced it with company financials and identified the projects where his involvement had directly impacted the bottom line. At 10:30, his phone buzzed. It was a calendar invite. Executive leadership meeting. Friday at 2 p.m. Attendees: Vivian Hale, Richard Crane, CFO Patricia Lim, COO Dennis York, and 3 board advisors. Subject line: Strategic planning and resource optimization. Ethan stared at the screen. Resource optimization. That was code. That was Richard's language. He accepted the invite. That afternoon, he ran into Richard in the break room. Richard was pouring coffee, humming under his breath. He glanced up when Ethan walked in. "Ethan, hey." "Richard, how's it going?" "Busy." Richard smiled. It was a practice smile, the kind that didn't reach his eyes. "Aren't we all?" Ethan grabbed a mug and filled it with coffee. He didn't say anything. "You get the invite for Friday?" Richard asked casually. "I did." "Good. Should be a productive conversation." Ethan took a sip of his coffee. It was bitter. "I'm sure it will be." Richard lingered for a moment like he wanted to say something else. Then he just nodded and left. Ethan stood there, holding his mug, staring at the door Richard had just walked through. Productive conversation. Right. That evening, Ethan worked late. Most of the office had cleared out by 7 p.m., but he stayed, refining his spreadsheet, pulling together case studies, building a narrative that wasn't defensive but undeniable. He wasn't going to beg. He wasn't going to apologize for being older, for not being part of the new guard, for not speaking the language of disruption and agility. He was going to show them what they'd lose. At 8:30, his phone rang. It was Chloe. "Where are you?" "Still at work." "Dad, you said you'd be home by 7. He closed his eyes. "I know. I'm sorry. I lost track of time." There was a pause. Then, softer. "You okay?" "Yeah, I'm okay." "You don't sound okay." He looked at the screen in front of him, at the columns of numbers and words that were supposed to prove his worth. "I'm just trying to figure some things out." "The work thing?" "Yeah." "You're going to be fine, Dad. You know that, right?" He wanted to believe her. He wanted to feel the certainty she had in him. "I hope so." "Don't hope. No." She paused. "Come home. You've done enough for today." He nodded, even though she couldn't see him. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. "Good. I made spaghetti. It's probably cold by now, but whatever." He smiled despite himself. "I'll heat it up." "You better." She hung up. Ethan sat there for another moment, then saved his work, shut down his computer, and grabbed his coat. Tipas samukasei. Friday came faster than he wanted. By 1:45, Ethan was standing outside the executive conference room, holding a leather portfolio that contained his research, his case studies, his proof. His heart was beating too fast. He forced himself to breathe slowly. Vivian arrived first. She glanced at him, gave a small nod, and walked inside. Then Patricia Lim. Then Dennis York. Then the board advisors, whose names Ethan knew but whose faces blurred together. And finally, Richard Crane. Richard smiled when he saw Ethan. "Ready for this?" Ethan didn't smile back. "Always." They walked into the conference room together. The room was large, sterile, with a long table and too many chairs. Vivian sat at the head. Richard took the seat to her right. Ethan sat across from him. The board advisors flanked the table. Patricia and Dennis sat at the far end, looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. Vivian folded her hands on the table. "Let's get started." Richard cleared his throat. "Thanks everyone for making time. I know we're all busy, but this is an important conversation." He opened a tablet and swiped through a few screens. "We've been looking at our operational structure, and there are some areas where we think we can improve efficiency." Ethan kept his expression neutral. "One of those areas," Richard continued, is how we manage institutional knowledge. We have a lot of talented people here who've been with us a long time. That's a strength, but it also creates vulnerabilities. Patricia frowned. What kind of vulnerabilities? Single points of failure, Richard said smoothly. When critical knowledge lives in one person's head, we're at risk if that person leaves, retires, or becomes unavailable. We need to build systems that distribute that knowledge more effectively. Dennis leaned back in his chair. So, what are you proposing? Richard smiled. A phase transition. We take our most experienced people and pair them with high-potential talent. Knowledge transfer. Mentorship. And then over time, we transition those senior roles into advisory positions, freeing up bandwidth and creating growth opportunities for the next generation. Vivian's face was unreadable. Who specifically are you talking about? Richard hesitated for just a fraction of a second. Then he looked directly at Ethan. I think Ethan would be a great candidate for this kind of transition. The room went quiet. Ethan felt every eye on him. He didn't move. One of the board advisors, a man named Gerald something, spoke up. Ethan's been with the company for over 2 decades. What's the rationale for moving him out of an operational role? Richard's tone stayed pleasant. It's not about moving him out. It's about evolution. Ethan's done incredible work here, but the reality is the pace of business has changed. We need people who can adapt quickly, who understand new technologies, who can operate in a faster, more agile environment. Patricia glanced at Ethan. Ethan, you want to respond to that? This was it. Ethan opened his portfolio. He pulled out the first page of his analysis and slid copies across the table. Over the last 5 years, he said quietly, I've been directly involved in projects that generated $63 million in revenue for this company. That's not historical. That's recent. That's relevant. Richard frowned slightly. Ethan kept going. The Pembroke deal. $3 million saved when the client was about to walk. The Harman product crisis. $80 million in potential liability, contained to under $500,000. The Riviera account. Dormant for 2 years, now one of our top 10 revenue sources. He slid more pages across the table. Those aren't just stories. Those are documented outcomes. Contracts. Financial statements. Client testimonials. Dennis picked up one of the pages and started reading. I'm not saying I'm irreplaceable, Ethan continued. I'm saying that what I do here isn't just about following a process. It's about judgment, relationships, instinct built over 2 decades of seeing how things break and how to fix them before anyone else notices. He looked directly at Richard. You can build all the systems you want. You can distribute all the knowledge you want, but you can't train someone to have 23 years of experience in 6 months. Richard's smile had faded. No one's saying we can, but we also can't operate on the assumption that experience alone is enough. I'm not asking you to, Ethan said. I'm asking you to recognize that experience is still valuable, and that getting rid of it in the name of efficiency is a gamble you can't afford to take. Patricia set down the page she was reading. These numbers are impressive. Gerald nodded slowly. I wasn't aware of half of these interventions. Richard's jaw tightened. With all due respect, this is exactly the problem. If Ethan is the only one who knows how to solve these issues, then we're vulnerable. We need to distribute that capability. Then let me train people, Ethan said. Pair me with your high-potential talent. Let me teach them what I know. But don't push me out and pretend it's progress. Vivian spoke for the first time since the conversation started. That's not a bad idea. Richard turned to her. Vivian, no, I mean it. She looked around the table. If the goal is knowledge transfer, then let's actually transfer the knowledge, not just document it and hope someone figures it out later. Dennis nodded. That makes sense to me. Richard sat back in his chair. He looked like someone had just moved a chess piece he hadn't anticipated. Gerald looked at Ethan. You'd be willing to take on a mentorship role? If it means staying in the fight, Ethan said. Yes. Patricia smiled faintly. I think we should explore this. Richard's expression was carefully controlled, but Ethan could see the frustration underneath. I'll need to think about the structure. Then think about it, Vivian said. But let's table the transition conversation for now. Richard didn't respond. He just closed his tablet and nodded. The meeting ended 10 minutes later. People filed out. Ethan stayed seated, staring at the papers in front of him. Vivian walked over and sat down next to him. You did good, she said quietly. I bought time, Ethan said. That's all. Time is what you needed. He looked at her. He's not going to let this go. I know, but now you've got leverage, and you've got a plan. She stood. Use it. Ethan gathered his papers and left the conference room. As he walked down the hallway, he passed Richard's office. The door was closed, but through the glass, he could see Richard on the phone again. His back was turned, but his posture was tense. Ethan kept walking. When he got home that night, Chloe was waiting for him. So? She asked. He set his briefcase down and exhaled. I'm still here, she grinned. Told you. It's not over. Nothing worth keeping ever is. He looked at her, this kid who somehow understood things he was still learning, and felt something settle in his chest. You're right. I'm always right. She walked over and hugged him. Now come on. I made tacos, and if you don't eat them while they're hot, I'm going to be offended. He laughed. It felt good. For the first time in weeks, Ethan Cole felt like maybe, just maybe, he could win this. But he also knew the fight had only just begun. Part 2 lưu ý. Viết 7.000 đến 7.500 từ liên kết liền mạch với các phần trước trong câu chuyện, pha hội thoại tạo thành một câu chuyện liền mạch khi ghép lại. Mỗi phần liền mạch với phần trước, không giới thiệu lại câu chuyện ở đầu phần mới. Liên kết các phần của câu chuyện một cách liền mạch, sử dụng câu chuyện tiếp giữa các phần, duy trì chủ đề, tránh ngắt quãng đột ngột, không sử dụng gạch đầu dòng hoặc tiêu đề phụ, phong cách kể chuyện Mỹ, Hoa Kỳ, giống văn giàu cảm xúc. Kẻ theo ngôi thứ 3, giữ đồ kịch tính không viết lan man, nhân vật không hoàn hảo, hội thoại tự nhiên, tránh ngôn ngữ văn chương sáo rơi và cụm từ AI điển hình. Viết như nhà văn chuyên nghiệp, không như AI cố gắng nghe sàng. Có yếu tố con người, cầm miêu tả quá mượt mà và hoàn hảo, kết thúc phần không giới thiệu phần sau, câu chuyện không nhắc đến Chúa. Lưu ý trả lời trong mục tin nhắn không nhảy sang document, chỉ đần bắt buộc, không được xuất hiện trong nội dung truyền. Đây là một câu chuyện điện ảnh hoàn toàn hư cấu được tạo ra chỉ nhằm mục đích giải trí. Không đề cập hay ngụ ý rằng nó dựa trên sự kiện có thật, người thật hoặc câu chuyện có thật. Không sử dụng các cụm từ như dựa trên một câu chuyện có thật, theo ghi chép hoặc bất cứ điều gì tương tự. Tất cả các nhân vật, địa điểm, tổ chức và sự kiện phải hoàn toàn hư cấu. The weekend passed in a strange fog. Ethan spent Saturday morning at Chloe's soccer game, watching her tear down the field with the kind of fearless aggression she'd inherited from her mother. She scored twice. After the game, she ran over, face flushed, grinning like she'd just conquered something. Did you see that second goal? She asked, breathless. I saw it, he said. You steamrolled that defender. She had it coming. She was talking trash the whole first half. He raised an eyebrow. And you just couldn't let that slide? Would you? He thought about Richard Crane's smile in the break room, the casual tone, the knife hidden behind pleasantries. No, he admitted. I wouldn't. She slung her gym bag over her shoulder. Exactly. So stop acting like you're supposed to. They went to lunch at a diner she liked, the kind with red vinyl booths and waitresses who'd been working there since the 80s. Chloe ordered a burger and fries. Ethan ordered coffee and barely touched the sandwich that came with it. You're doing it again, Chloe said. Doing what? That thing where you're here but not really here. He set his coffee down. Sorry. You keep apologizing. Just tell me what's going on. He looked at her across the table. She was watching him with that intensity she got when she wanted the truth, not the version adults fed kids to make them feel better. I made it through one meeting, he said. That doesn't mean I'm safe. So what's next? I don't know yet. Then figure it out. She dipped a fry in ketchup. You said you were going to fight, so fight. He nodded slowly. You make it sound simple. It is simple, it's just not easy. He smiled despite himself. When did you turn into a philosopher? I've always been one. You just don't listen. You said that last time. Because it's still true. They finished lunch and he drove her home. She disappeared into her room to do homework, and Ethan sat at the kitchen table with his laptop, staring at the spreadsheet he'd built. The numbers were solid, the case was clear. But numbers didn't win wars, people did. He needed allies. He opened his email and started drafting a message to Patricia Lim, the CFO. She'd seemed receptive during the meeting. Maybe she'd be willing to talk. He wrote 3 versions before he sent one. It was short, professional, and didn't sound desperate. Patricia, I wanted to follow up on Friday's conversation. If you have time this week, I'd appreciate the chance to discuss how we might structure a mentorship program that actually works. Let me know. Ethan. He hit send before he could second-guess himself. Then he wrote another email, this time to Dennis York, the COO. Dennis had nodded along during the meeting, but Ethan didn't know where he really stood. The email was similar, brief, direct, non-threatening. By Sunday night, he'd sent 5 emails, 3 to executives, 2 to department heads who'd worked with him on major projects and might be willing to vouch for his value. He didn't know if any of them would respond, but at least he'd done something. Monday morning came too fast. Ethan arrived at the office at 7:30 and found an email waiting for him. It was from Patricia. Ethan, happy to talk. I've got 30 minutes at 10 a.m. if that works. P. He read it twice, then replied immediately. That works, thanks. At 9:55, he walked to Patricia's office. She was on the phone when he arrived, but she waved him in and gestured to the chair across from her desk. He sat and waited. Patricia was in her mid-50s, precise and unflappable. She wore reading glasses on a chain and always looked like she was 3 steps ahead of everyone else in the room. She ended her call and set the phone down. Ethan, thanks for coming by. Thanks for making time. She leaned back in her chair and studied him for a moment. That was an interesting presentation on Friday. I wasn't planning to give one, but it felt necessary. It was. Richard's been circling for a while. I think Vivian was right to warn you. Ethan didn't respond. He wanted to let her lead the conversation. Patricia took off her glasses and set them on the desk. Here's the thing, Richard's not wrong about everything. We do have single points of failure. We do have knowledge that lives in people's heads and nowhere else. But his solution is a sledgehammer when we need a scalpel. That's what I'm trying to avoid, Ethan said. I know. And I think your idea, pairing experienced people with high potential talent, could work. But it only works if you actually commit to it. If you're just stalling for time, people will see through it. I'm not stalling. Good. Because if you are, you'll lose. And honestly, that would be a waste. She picked up a pen and tapped it against her desk. I've worked with you on 3 major deals. You've never missed a deadline, never dropped a ball, and never blamed someone else when things went sideways. That's rare. And it's valuable. Thank you. Don't thank me. Just don't screw this up. She smiled faintly. If you do this right, you won't just save your job. You'll change how this company thinks about succession planning. Ethan felt something loosen in his chest. I'll do my best. Your best is usually pretty good. She put her glasses back on. Now get out of here. I've got a budget call in 5 minutes. He stood and left her office, feeling lighter than he had in days. 1 ally down. A few more to go. By Tuesday afternoon, Ethan had responses from 2 of the other people he'd emailed. One was non-committal. The other, a department head named Laura Chen, was cautiously supportive. I think you're onto something, she wrote. Let me know if you need a testimonial or data from any of the projects we worked on together. He replied immediately. I'll take you up on that. Thanks, Laura. Wednesday brought a different kind of email. It was from Richard Crane, sent at 6:47 a.m. Ethan, let's set up some time to discuss the mentorship structure. I'd like to align on expectations before we move forward. Let me know your availability. Richard. Ethan stared at the message. It was cordial, professional, and somehow felt like a trap. He replied an hour later. I'm free Thursday afternoon. Let me know what works. Richard responded within minutes. 2 p.m. My office. Ethan accepted the meeting and tried not to think about what Richard might be planning. That night, he got home late again. Chloe was at the kitchen table, textbooks spread out in front of her. She looked up when he walked in. You're working too much, she said. I know. Seriously, you look exhausted. He set his briefcase down and rubbed his eyes. I'm fine. You're not fine. You're running yourself into the ground. He sat down across from her. What am I supposed to do? Just coast and hope it works out? No, but you're not going to win if you collapse before the finish line. She had a point. He knew she had a point. But knowing it and acting on it were 2 different things. I've got a meeting with Richard on Thursday, he said. Chloe's expression darkened. The guy who's trying to push you out? Yeah. What does he want? I don't know. Probably to control the narrative, make sure I don't go off script. Are you going to let him? Ethan looked at her. What do you think? She smiled. I think you're going to walk in there and make him regret ever starting this. He wished he had her confidence, but he nodded anyway. That's the plan. Thursday came. Ethan spent the morning preparing, going over his notes, making sure he had answers for any angle Richard might try. At 1:50, he walked to Richard's office. The door was open. Richard was sitting at his desk, typing on his laptop. He glanced up and smiled. Ethan, come in. Close the door. Ethan did. He sat down in the chair across from Richard's desk and waited. Richard finished typing, closed his laptop, and leaned back in his chair. Thanks for making time. Of course. I wanted to clear the air a little, Richard said. I think Friday's meeting got a little tense, and I don't want there to be any misunderstanding about what I'm trying to do here. All right. I'm not trying to push you out, Richard said. I'm really not. I think you've done great work here, but I also think we need to be realistic about where the company is headed. We're scaling fast. We're dealing with new technologies, new competitors, new expectations, and that requires a different kind of agility. Ethan kept his expression neutral. I'm listening. What I'm proposing isn't a demotion. It's an evolution. You stay involved. You mentor the next generation. You help us build the systems we need to scale, but you also step back from some of the day-to-day operational pressure. Let the younger talent take on more responsibility. And if I don't want to step back? Richard's smile didn't falter. Then we're going to have a problem. The room went quiet. Ethan leaned forward slightly. Here's the thing, Richard. I don't think this is about agility. I think it's about control. You want to reshape the company in your image, and I'm in the way. Richard's smile finally faded. That's not fair, isn't it? You've been here 7 years. I've been here 23. And in those 23 years, I've seen a lot of people like you come through. Smart, ambitious, full of ideas about how to fix things that aren't broken. And you know what happens to most of them? What? They burn out, or they move on, or they realize that running a company isn't about having the best ideas, it's about execution. And execution takes experience. Richard's jaw tightened. Experience without adaptability is just stubbornness. And adaptability without judgment is just chaos. They stared at each other across the desk. Neither of them blinked. Finally, Richard sat back. I think we're going to have to agree to disagree. I think we are. Richard opened his laptop again. I'll draft a proposal for the mentorship structure. We'll review it with Vivian and the team next week. Looking forward to it, Ethan stood and left the office. His heart was pounding, but he kept his face calm. He walked back to his desk, sat down, and exhaled slowly. That had not gone well, but he also hadn't backed down, and that mattered. That evening, Ethan got a text from Vivian. How did it go with Richard? He typed back. About as well as you'd expect. Her response came a minute later. He's going to escalate. Be ready. He stared at the message. Then he typed, I am. He wasn't sure if that was true, but he was going to make it true. Over the next week, Ethan worked harder than he had in years. He pulled together detailed case studies on the projects he'd worked on. He reached out to clients and asked for written testimonials. He documented every process, every system, every instinct he'd developed over 2 decades. And he started identifying the people Richard wanted him to mentor. There were 2 names that kept coming up. Sienna Park, a 31-year-old project manager who'd been with the company for 4 years. And Malik Grant, a 28-year-old analyst who'd made a name for himself by turning around a failing account. Ethan didn't know either of them well, but if he was going to do this, he needed to know who he was working with. He started with Sienna. He found her in the break room on Friday afternoon, pouring coffee. She looked up when he walked in. Ethan, hey. Sienna, you got a minute? She glanced at her watch. Yeah, what's up? I wanted to talk to you about something. You free for lunch next week? She frowned slightly. Sure. What's this about? Mentorship. I'll explain more when we meet. She nodded slowly. Okay. Monday work? Monday's good. They set a time, and Ethan left the break room feeling like he'd taken another small step forward. He reached out to Malik the same day. They met for coffee on Saturday morning at a place near the office. Malik was sharp, confident, maybe a little cocky. He sat down across from Ethan and got straight to the point. So what's this about? Malik asked. Richard Crane wants me to mentor a few people. Your name came up. Malik raised an eyebrow. And you're asking me if I'm interested? I'm asking if you're serious. About what? About learning, about doing the work, about understanding that there's a difference between being smart and being ready. Malik leaned back in his chair. You don't pull punches, do you? No? Good. Neither do I. He took a sip of his coffee. I'm interested, but I'm not interested in being someone's token protege. If you're going to teach me something, it better be real. Ethan nodded. Fair enough. They talked for another 30 minutes. By the end of it, Ethan had a sense of who Malik was. Ambitious, hungry, a little rough around the edges, but capable. He could work with that. Monday's lunch with Sienna was different. She was quieter, more measured. She asked thoughtful questions and listened carefully to the answers. When Ethan explained what he was trying to do, she didn't jump in right away. You're trying to prove you're still valuable, she said finally. I'm trying to prove experience still matters. And you want me to be part of that? Only if you want to be. She thought about it for a long moment. Then she nodded. I'm in, but I need to know you're not just using me to win a political fight. I'm not. I'm trying to build something that lasts. Okay. She smiled faintly. Then let's do it. By the end of the week, Ethan had a plan. He'd meet with Sienna and Malik twice a week. He'd walk them through real projects, real crises, real decisions. He'd teach them how to read a room, how to salvage a deal, how to see problems before they became disasters. And in the process, he'd prove that what he knew couldn't be downloaded from a database or learned in a seminar. The first session was scheduled for the following Tuesday. Ethan didn't know if it would work, but he knew he had to try. That weekend, Chloe asked him how things were going. Better, he said. I think. You think? I'm doing what I can. The rest is out of my hands. She looked at him for a long moment. You know what's weird? What? You're starting to sound like someone who believes in himself again. He smiled. Is that weird? For you? Kind of. He laughed. It felt good. For the first time in weeks, Ethan felt like maybe he wasn't just surviving. Maybe he was actually building something. But in the back of his mind, he knew Richard wasn't done, and the real fight was still coming. Tuesday arrived, and Ethan met Sienna and Malik in a small conference room on the 3rd floor. He'd reserved it for 2 hours. He'd brought coffee, a whiteboard, and a stack of case files. Sienna arrived first. She sat down and pulled out a notebook. Malik showed up 5 minutes late, looking slightly annoyed. Traffic, he muttered. Sit, Ethan said. Malik sat. Ethan stood at the front of the room and looked at them. Here's how this is going to work. I'm not going to lecture you. I'm not going to give you a bunch of theory. I'm going to show you what I do, and you're going to learn by doing it. Sienna nodded. Malik looked skeptical. First lesson, Ethan said. Read the room before you open your mouth. He walked over to the whiteboard and drew a simple diagram, a circle representing a meeting, dots representing people, lines connecting the dots. Every meeting has a power structure, he said. Most people walk in and start talking without understanding who has influence, who's aligned, who's waiting for someone else to make a mistake. If you don't read the room first, you're going to say the wrong thing to the wrong person at the wrong time. How do you read it? Sienna asked. You watch. You listen. You pay attention to who speaks first, who defers to whom, who gets interrupted and who doesn't. He tapped the board. And you adjust your strategy accordingly. Malik frowned. So it's just politics. It's not just politics, it's survival. And if you think you can ignore it, you're going to get eaten alive. Malik didn't look convinced, but he didn't argue. Ethan spent the next hour walking them through a real case, the Pembroke deal. He explained how the client had been ready to walk, how the internal team had been panicking, how the relationship had soured because no one had been paying attention to the warning signs. So what did you do? Sienna asked. I flew to Atlanta, sat down with the client, and asked what we'd screwed up. That's it, Malik said. That's it. Most people would have gone in defensive, tried to explain why the client was wrong. I went in humble, I acknowledged the problem, and then I fixed it. And that worked? The deal closed 2 weeks later. Sienna was writing everything down. Malik was leaning back in his chair, arms crossed, but Ethan could tell he was listening. Second lesson, Ethan said. Own the mistake before someone else does. He told them about the Harmon crisis, the product defect, the potential lawsuits, the way the company had been ready to spin it, deflect blame, hide behind legal language. That would have been a disaster, Ethan said, because the truth always comes out, and when it does, the cover-up is worse than the crime. So what did you do? Sienna asked. I told them to admit the defect, fix it immediately, and compensate the affected clients without making them fight for it. And they listened to you? Eventually, after I showed them the math, lawsuits would have cost $80 million. Fixing it up front cost $400,000. Not a hard decision once you lay it out. Malik nodded slowly. That makes sense. Most things do, Ethan said, once you stop panicking. They worked through 2 more cases. By the end of the session, Sienna had filled half her notebook. Malik had stopped looking skeptical and started asking questions. When the 2 hours were up, Ethan closed his folder. That's it for today. Sienna stood. When's the next one? Thursday, same time. I'll be here. Malik lingered for a moment. This is actually useful. Good, Ethan said, because it's going to get harder. Malik smirked. Looking forward to it. They left. Ethan sat in the empty conference room for a few minutes, staring at the whiteboard. It was working, or at least it was starting to. That evening, he got an email from Richard. The subject line was mentorship proposal, review requested. Ethan opened it. Inside was a 20-page document outlining a formal mentorship program. Timelines, deliverables, performance metrics, transition milestones. At the bottom was a note. Let's discuss next week. I'd like to present this to the board by the end of the month. Ethan read the document twice. It was thorough, professional, and designed to box him in. Every deliverable was tied to a timeline. Every milestone was tracked. And at the end of the 6-month period, there was a section labeled Role Transition and Retirement Planning. Retirement. There it was. Richard wasn't interested in mentorship. He was interested in managing Ethan out of the company with a paper trail that made it look voluntary. Ethan closed the email and leaned back in his chair. He'd known this was coming, but seeing it in writing made it real. He picked up his phone and texted Vivian. Got Richard's proposal. We need to talk. Her response came 2 minutes later. Tomorrow, 8 a.m. My office. Ethan set the phone down and stared at the ceiling. The fight wasn't over. It was just getting started. Ethan arrived at Vivian's office at 7:53 a.m. The hallway was still mostly empty, just a few early risers moving through with coffee cups and tired eyes. Vivian's door was open. She was standing by the window, phone pressed to her ear, looking out at the city. She glanced over when he knocked, waved him in, and wrapped up her call. I'll get back to you on that, she said into the phone. Thanks. She hung up and turned to face him. You read it? Every word. And? It's a trap. Vivian nodded slowly. I thought so too. She walked back to her desk and sat down. He's trying to build a case that looks collaborative on paper but gives him all the control. Ethan sat across from her. The timelines are aggressive. The deliverables are vague enough that he can move the goalposts whenever he wants. And the end result is me transitioning out in 6 months, whether I want to or not. Retirement planning, Vivian said flatly. That was subtle. About as subtle as a brick. She leaned back in her chair. So what do you want to do? I want to rewrite it. Can you? I don't know, but I'm not signing off on his version. Vivian studied him for a moment. If you push back too hard, he's going to say you're being difficult, that you're not a team player, and he'll use that to justify pushing you out faster. And if I don't push back, I'm just agreeing to my own execution. She sighed. You're not wrong. So what do I do? You play it smart. She pulled out a notepad and started writing. You don't reject his proposal outright. You acknowledge the good parts, then suggest modifications that protect you. Make it sound collaborative. Make it sound like you're trying to help him succeed, while actually gutting his plan. Exactly. Ethan almost smiled. You're good at this. I've had practice. She tore off the page and slid it across the desk. Here's what I think you should focus on. Reframe the deliverables so they're measurable but realistic. Extend the timeline so you're not working against an impossible clock. And remove any language that ties the mentorship to your departure. He looked at the notes. You think he'll go for it? No. But you're not trying to get him to go for it. You're trying to create a paper trail that shows you were reasonable, and he wasn't. For the board. For the board, Ethan folded the paper and put it in his pocket. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. This is going to get worse before it gets better. He stood. I know. As he left her office, he felt the weight of what was coming settle over him again. This wasn't just about one meeting or one proposal. This was a war of attrition, and Richard had more time and more patience than Ethan wanted to admit. But he also had something Richard didn't. He had people who believed in him, and he had a plan. Over the next 2 days, Ethan worked on his counterproposal. He rewrote sections, tightened language, removed anything that could be used against him later. He ran it past Patricia, who offered a few suggestions. He ran it past Laura Chen, who helped him frame the performance metrics in a way that was fair but protective. By Thursday morning, he had a document he could defend. He sent it to Richard at 9 a.m. with a short note. Richard, I reviewed your proposal and made some modifications that I think will help us build something sustainable. Let me know your thoughts. Ethan. Richard responded an hour later. Let's meet. Friday, 3 p.m., my office. Ethan accepted. That afternoon, he had his second session with Sienna and Malik. This time, he brought a live case, a current client relationship that was starting to fray. The client's name is Dover Industries, Ethan said. They've been with us for 8 years, revenue of about $2 million a year, solid relationship until 6 months ago when their primary contact left and someone new took over. What's the problem? Sienna asked. The new contact doesn't trust us. She thinks we're coasting on the old relationship and not delivering enough value. Is she right? Malik asked. Ethan paused. Partly. Malik raised an eyebrow. So what do? We rebuild the relationship, but first we figure out what she actually wants. He walked them through the process. Research the new contact. Understand her priorities. Identify where the company had dropped the ball. Then come in with a plan that addressed her concerns before she had to ask. Don't wait for the client to tell you what's wrong, Ethan said. By the time they do, it's usually too late. Sienna was writing furiously. Malik was nodding along. So how do we approach her? Malik asked. Carefully. You can't come in defensive. You can't come in salesy. You come in curious. You ask questions. You listen. And then you fix what's broken. Sounds simple, Malik said. It is simple. It's just not easy. They spent the next hour role-playing the conversation. Ethan played the client. Sienna went first, and she was good, calm, thoughtful, careful not to overpromise. Malik went second, and he was rougher but more direct. By the end, they both had a sense of how to handle it. Good, Ethan said. Now here's the hard part. I want you to actually do it. Sienna looked up. Wait, what? I'm setting up a call with Dover Industries next week. You're both going to be on it, and you're going to lead the conversation. Malik frowned. You're serious? Completely. What if we screw it up? Sienna asked. Then we fix it. But you won't screw it up. You're ready. Sienna didn't look convinced. Malik looked somewhere between excited and terrified. Trust me, Ethan said. You'll be fine. The session ended, and they left. Ethan stayed in the conference room, staring at his notes. He was putting a lot of faith in two people he barely knew, but if this was going to work, he had to give them real responsibility. Otherwise, it was just theater. Friday afternoon came. Ethan walked to Richard's office at 2:58. The door was closed. He knocked. Come in. Richard was sitting at his desk, Ethan's counter-proposal open on his laptop. He didn't look happy. Sit, Richard said. Ethan sat. Richard closed the laptop and looked at him. I read your edits. And? They undermine the entire structure. They protect the integrity of the program. They protect you, Richard said, which is exactly the problem. This isn't supposed to be about protecting you. It's supposed to be about building a sustainable system. And my version does that. Your version just uses the program as cover to push me out. Richard's expression hardened. That's not fair, isn't it? You've got retirement planning baked into the timeline. You've got deliverables that are impossible to meet. And you've got language that ties my role to a transition that I never agreed to. Because that's the reality, Ethan. You're not going to be here forever. We need to plan for that. Then plan for it. But don't pretend this is about mentorship when it's really about succession. Richard stood and walked to the window. He stared out at the city for a long moment, his back to Ethan. "You know what your problem is?" Richard said quietly. "I'm sure you're about to tell me. You think loyalty is enough. You think because you've been here for 23 years that buys you unlimited runway. But it doesn't. The company doesn't owe you anything just because you showed up." Ethan stood. "I never said it did, but I've earned the right to not be erased." Richard turned around. "No one's erasing you." "Then stop writing proposals that do exactly that." They stared at each other. The air in the room felt thin. Finally, Richard sat back down. "I'll review your edits, but I'm not promising anything. I'm not asking for promises, I'm asking for fairness. We'll see." Ethan left the office. His hands were shaking slightly, but he kept his face calm. He walked back to his desk, sat down, and exhaled slowly. That had gone about as well as he'd expected, which was to say, not well at all. That evening, Chloe asked him how the meeting went. "It went," he said. "That bad?" "He's not backing down." "Are you?" He looked at her. "What do you think?" She smiled. "I think you're too stubborn to back down." "Probably." She walked over and sat on the arm of his chair. "You know what Mom used to say about people like him?" "What?" "That they talk a big game, but the second you call their bluff, they fold." Ethan thought about that. "You think Richard's bluffing?" "I think he's used to people being scared of him, and you're not scared." "I'm a little scared." "Good. Scared keeps you sharp." She stood. "Now come on, dinner's ready." They ate together, and for a little while Ethan let himself forget about Richard and proposals and timelines. He just listened to Chloe talk about school, about her friends, about a college visit she had coming up. "You nervous?" he asked. "A little. It's a good school. I don't know if I'll get in." "You'll get in." "You don't know that." "I know you. You'll get in." She smiled. "You have a lot of faith in me." "Someone has to." She laughed. "Fair." After dinner, Ethan went back to his laptop and kept working. He refined his counterproposal. He prepared for the Dover Industries call. He built contingency plans for every scenario he could think of. By midnight, his eyes were burning, but he kept going. The Dover call was scheduled for Wednesday at 10 a.m. Ethan spent Monday and Tuesday prepping Sienna and Malik. They ran through the talking points. They practiced handling objections. They rehearsed until Ethan was confident they could handle it. Wednesday morning arrived. Ethan set up the conference room early, tested the video connection, and made sure everything was ready. Sienna showed up 15 minutes early, looking nervous. Malik arrived right on time, looking calm. "You good?" Ethan asked. "Yeah," Sienna said. She didn't sound convinced. "You're going to do great," Ethan said. "Just remember what we talked about. Listen first, ask questions. Don't oversell." She nodded. At 10 a.m., the call connected. The client, a woman named Karen Weston, appeared on screen. She was in her early 40s, sharp-eyed, with the look of someone who didn't suffer nonsense. "Good morning," Ethan said. "Thanks for making time. I've got two of our team members with me today, Sienna Park and Malik Grant. They've been working closely with me on your account, and I wanted them to be part of this conversation." Karen nodded. "All right." Ethan gestured to Sienna. She took a breath and started. "Karen, we wanted to check in because we know there's been a transition on your side, and we want to make sure we're still meeting your expectations." Karen leaned back in her chair. "Honestly, I'm not sure you are." Sienna didn't flinch. "Can you tell us more about that?" Karen hesitated, then spoke. "When I took over this account, I inherited a relationship that felt like it was running on autopilot. Monthly check-ins that didn't go anywhere. Reports that looked good on paper but didn't actually help us make decisions. I'm not saying you're doing a bad job. I'm saying I'm not sure you're doing enough." Malik jumped in. "What would enough look like to you?" Karen seemed surprised by the question. "I don't know. That's part of the problem. I feel like I'm supposed to know what to ask for, but I don't. I just know what we're getting now isn't cutting it." Sienna leaned forward. "That's fair, and that's on us. We should have come to you sooner and asked that question." "So what do we do about it?" Karen asked. Malik pulled up a document on his screen and shared it. "We put together a few ideas, not a pitch, just options. Things we think could add value based on what we know about your business. Karen studied the screen. Ethan stayed quiet, letting them handle it. This is helpful, Karen said after a moment. Why didn't anyone show me this before? Because we didn't ask the right questions, Sienna said, but we're asking now. The call went on for another 30 minutes. By the end, Karen seemed more engaged, more willing to give them a chance. She agreed to a follow-up meeting in 2 weeks to discuss next steps. When the call ended, Sienna let out a breath. That was terrifying. You did great, Ethan said. Malik grinned. She liked us. She liked that you were honest, Ethan said. That's the difference between keeping a client and losing one. They debriefed for another 20 minutes, then Sienna and Malik left. Ethan sat in the conference room alone, staring at the blank screen. It had worked. They'd done it. And more importantly, they'd learned something. That afternoon, Ethan got an email from Richard. The subject line was Revised Proposal, Final Draft. He opened it. Inside was a new version of the mentorship program. Some of Ethan's edits had been incorporated, but the retirement timeline was still there. The transition language was still there. At the bottom was a note. This is as far as I can go. Let me know if you can sign off on this. Ethan stared at the email for a long time. He couldn't sign off on it. Not like this. He picked up his phone and called Vivian. He sent you the revised version? She asked. Yeah. And? It's better, but it's not good enough. So what are you going to do? I'm going to reject it. There was a pause. You know that's going to escalate this, right? I know. And you're ready for that? I don't have a choice. Vivian sighed. All right, then do it. But make sure you have your documentation ready, because when this goes to the board, you're going to need proof that you tried to make it work. I've got it. Good. Then go to war. Ethan hung up. He opened his email and started typing. Richard, I appreciate the revisions, but I can't sign off on this version. The timeline still doesn't reflect the realities of knowledge transfer, and the transition language still frames this as a departure rather than a partnership. I'm happy to keep working on this, but I need us to be aligned on the goal. If the goal is to build a mentorship program, I'm in. If the goal is to manage me out, let's just say that and stop pretending. Ethan. He read it twice. Then he hit send. 10 minutes later, his phone rang. It was Richard. Ethan answered. Yeah? Are you serious? Richard's voice was tight. Completely. You're making this impossible. I'm making it honest. You're sabotaging the whole thing. No, Richard. I'm refusing to be erased. There's a difference. Richard was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Fine. If that's how you want to play it, we'll take it to the board. Good. Let's do that. Richard hung up. Ethan set the phone down and stared at it. His heart was pounding. He'd just burned a bridge he couldn't rebuild. But he also felt something he hadn't felt in weeks. Clarity. That night, he told Chloe what had happened. So it's going to the board? She asked. Yeah. And you think you can win? I don't know, but I'm going to fight like I can. She studied him for a moment. You look different. Different how? Like you're not scared anymore. He thought about that. I'm still scared, but I'm more angry than scared now. She grinned. Good. Angry is better. Over the next 2 weeks, Ethan prepared for the board presentation like it was the most important meeting of his life. Because it was. He refined his case studies. He gathered testimonials from clients. He pulled financial data that showed his direct impact on revenue. He documented every conversation he'd had with Richard, every edit he'd suggested, every attempt he'd made to collaborate. He also kept working with Sienna and Malik. They had another session on the Dover account. They worked through a crisis on a different project. They learned how to handle difficult clients, how to navigate internal politics, how to think 3 steps ahead. And slowly, Ethan started to see something take shape. Not just a mentorship program, a system, a way of passing on knowledge that actually worked. Patricia checked in halfway through the second week. How are you holding up? I'm tired, Ethan admitted, but I'm ready. Good. Because Richard's building his case too, and he's not going to make this easy. I wouldn't expect him to. She smiled faintly. You know, when this started, I thought you might just roll over. Let it happen. Why? Because most people do. They get tired, they get worn down, and they decide it's not worth the fight. And now? Now I think you're going to surprise a lot of people. The board meeting was scheduled for Friday at 2 p.m. Ethan spent Thursday night going over his notes one last time. Chloe sat with him at the kitchen table, pretending to do homework, but mostly just keeping him company. "You nervous?" she asked. "Terrified." "Good." He looked at her. "Why is that good?" "Because it means you care." She closed her textbook. "You're going to do great, Dad." "You don't know that." "Yeah, I do." She stood and kissed the top of his head. "Now get some sleep. You're going to need it." Friday morning came. Ethan put on his best suit, the one he wore to client meetings that mattered. He double-checked his portfolio. He drove to the office with the radio off, rehearsing his opening in his head. By 1:45, he was standing outside the executive boardroom. Vivian arrived a few minutes later. She gave him a nod. "You ready?" she asked. "As ready as I'm going to be." "Then let's go." They walked into the boardroom together. The space was large, sterile, with a long table and too many chairs. Patricia was already seated. So was Dennis. So were the board advisors. And at the far end of the table, Richard Crane sat with his laptop open, looking calm and prepared. Ethan took his seat. Vivian sat at the head of the table. "Let's get started," she said. Richard went first. He pulled up a presentation on the screen at the front of the room. It was polished, professional, filled with charts and timelines and data. "Thank you all for making time," Richard began. "Today, we're here to finalize the structure of our mentorship and succession planning program. This is an important initiative, and I want to make sure we get it right." He clicked through his slides. He talked about knowledge transfer, about building sustainable systems, about preparing the company for the future. And then he got to the section about Ethan. "Ethan Cole has been a valuable member of this team for over 2 decades, Richard said. "But as we look ahead, we need to ensure that his knowledge doesn't leave with him when he eventually retires. That's why we're proposing a 6-month mentorship program that transitions Ethan into an advisory role while we bring new talent into his operational responsibilities." Gerald, one of the board advisors, spoke up. "And Ethan's agreed to this?" Richard hesitated. "We've been working through the details, but there have been some disagreements about the timeline." "What kind of disagreements?" Patricia asked. Richard glanced at Ethan. "Ethan has expressed concerns that the program is moving too quickly." "Because it is," Ethan said quietly. All eyes turned to him. Vivian gestured to Ethan. "Why don't you walk us through your perspective?" Ethan stood. He opened his portfolio and pulled out his materials. "I'm not opposed to mentorship," he said. "I'm opposed to a program that uses mentorship as cover for forced retirement." He handed out copies of his case studies. "Over the last 5 years, I've been involved in projects that generated $63 million in revenue. I've saved deals that were on the verge of collapse. I've contained crises that could have cost the company tens of millions. And I've done all of this while maintaining relationships that most people here don't even know exist." He walked them through the Pembroke deal, the Harmon crisis, the Riviera account, the Dover Industries turnaround that was happening right now. "This isn't about ego," Ethan said. "It's about value. Real, measurable value. And Richard's proposal doesn't account for that. It assumes I can hand off 23 years of experience in 6 months and walk away. But that's not how this works." He pulled out the timeline analysis he'd prepared. "Knowledge transfer takes time. Real mentorship takes years, not months. And if you rush it, you're going to lose more than you gain." Dennis leaned forward. "So what are you proposing?" "I'm proposing we build a program that actually works. One that gives me time to train Sienna Park and Malik Grant properly. One that doesn't have an arbitrary retirement deadline attached. And one that acknowledges that my value to this company isn't finished just because Richard thinks it should be." Richard's jaw was tight. "This isn't personal, Ethan." "It feels pretty personal. It's about the future of the company." "Then let's talk about the future." Ethan turned to the board. "In the last 2 weeks, I've been working with Sienna and Malik. We've salvaged the Dover account. We've worked through a crisis on the Langston project. And they're learning, but they're not ready to take over yet. And if you force this transition before they are, you're going to lose clients. You're going to lose revenue. And you're going to lose institutional knowledge that can't be rebuilt. Patricia looked at Richard. Is that true? Are they not ready? Richard hesitated. They're learning, but nothing, Ethan said. They're good. They're talented, but they need more time, and so do I. The room went quiet. Gerald looked at the materials in front of him. Patricia was reading one of the case studies. Dennis was leaning back in his chair, thinking. Finally, Vivian spoke. I think we need to vote on this. Richard straightened in his chair. A vote on what, exactly? Vivian's expression was calm, deliberate. On whether we move forward with Richard's timeline or give Ethan the space to build something sustainable. Gerald set down the papers he'd been reading. I think we need more than a binary choice here. This isn't just about picking sides. Then what is it about? Richard asked, his voice sharp. It's about what's actually best for the company, Patricia said. She looked at Ethan. You said Sienna and Malik aren't ready. How long do you think they need? Ethan had been expecting this question. 12 to 18 months, minimum. Richard laughed. It wasn't a friendly sound. That's ridiculous. 6 months is more than enough time. For what? Ethan shot back. To teach them how to fill out reports? Sure. But to teach them how to read a room, how to salvage a relationship that's falling apart, how to make a decision when there's no clear answer, that takes longer. Dennis tapped his pen against the table. Ethan's got a point. We've all seen people get promoted too fast. They flame out because they're not ready for the pressure. And we've also seen people hold on to power too long, Richard countered. This company doesn't move forward by clinging to the past. No one's clinging, Ethan said. I'm offering to build a bridge between what we've been and what we're becoming. But you can't build a bridge in 6 months and expect it to hold. One of the other board advisors, a woman named Michelle Torres, spoke up for the first time. What happens if we extend the timeline? What does that look like operationally? Ethan pulled out another document. He'd prepared for this too. I stay in my current role while Sienna and Malik shadow me on major projects. They take on increasing responsibility over time. By month 9, they're leading projects with me as backup. By month 15, they're running things independently, and I'm transitioning to advisory. By month 18, the handoff is complete. Michelle nodded slowly. That sounds more realistic than what Richard's proposing. Richard's face was tight. With all due respect, that timeline makes Ethan indispensable for another year and a half, which is exactly what he wants. What I want, Ethan said, his voice harder now, is for this company to not screw itself over in the name of efficiency. You want to replace me? Fine, but do it right. Don't do it fast. The room went quiet again. Ethan could feel his heart hammering against his ribs. He'd said what he needed to say. Now it was out of his hands. Vivian looked around the table. I think we need to take a vote. All in favor of extending the mentorship timeline to 18 months and keeping Ethan in his current role during that period? Patricia raised her hand immediately. Dennis followed. Gerald hesitated, then raised his hand. Michelle raised hers. 4 votes. Vivian raised her own hand. That's 5. Richard didn't move. The other board advisor, a man named Carl Brennan, who'd been silent the entire meeting, also kept his hand down. Motion carries, Vivian said. We'll move forward with Ethan's timeline. Richard closed his laptop. His face was unreadable, but Ethan could see the tension in his jaw, the way his hands gripped the edge of the table just a little too tightly. This is a mistake, Richard said quietly. Maybe, Vivian replied, but it's the one we're making. The meeting ended 5 minutes later. People stood, gathered their things, started filing out. Patricia walked past Ethan and gave him a small nod. Gerald stopped to shake his hand. Good presentation, Gerald said. You made your case. Thank you. When the room finally cleared, it was just Ethan, Vivian, and Richard. Richard was still sitting at the far end of the table, staring at his closed laptop. Vivian looked at Ethan. You should go. Ethan nodded. He picked up his portfolio and walked toward the door. As he passed Richard, Richard spoke without looking up. This isn't over. Ethan stopped. He turned back. I know. You think you won, but all you did was delay the inevitable. Maybe, but I'll take the delay. Richard finally looked at him. You're going to regret this. Ethan held his gaze. I doubt it. He left the boardroom and walked down the hallway. His legs felt shaky. His hands were trembling slightly, but he'd done it. He'd stood his ground and he'd won, for now. He got back to his desk and sat down. His phone buzzed. It was a text from Chloe. "How'd it go?" He typed back. "I'm still here." Her response came immediately. "Told you." He smiled despite himself. Then he opened his laptop and started working. There were emails to answer, projects to manage, a dozen things that needed his attention. But for the first time in weeks, he didn't feel like he was working under a countdown clock. That evening, he got home early. Chloe was in the kitchen making dinner, pasta, from the smell of it. "You're cooking?" he asked. "Don't sound so surprised. I'm not completely useless." "I never said you were useless." "You implied it." She stirred the pot on the stove. "So tell me everything." He did. He walked her through the whole meeting, the presentation, the vote, Richard's reaction. She listened without interrupting, and when he finished, she just nodded. "So you bought yourself 18 months. "Yeah." "What are you going to do with them?" "Make sure Sienna and Malik are ready. Make sure the transition actually works. Make sure I leave this place better than I found it." She turned off the stove and started plating the pasta. "You know what's funny?" "What?" "A month ago, you were talking like you were done, like you were just waiting for someone to push you out the door." "I was tired." "And now?" He thought about it. "Now I'm still tired, but I'm not done." She handed him a plate. "Good, because I like this version of you better." They ate dinner together, and Ethan felt something settle in his chest that hadn't been there in a long time. Not relief exactly, not peace, but something close to purpose. The next week, Ethan dove back into the mentorship work with renewed focus. He scheduled sessions with Sienna and Malik 3 times a week now instead of 2. He brought them into client meetings, let them take the lead on smaller projects, gave them real responsibility with real consequences. Sienna thrived under the pressure. She was cautious, methodical, always thinking 2 steps ahead. Malik was more aggressive, more willing to take risks. They balanced each other out in ways Ethan hadn't expected. 2 weeks after the board meeting, they had their follow-up call with Karen Weston at Dover Industries. This time, Ethan let them run the entire conversation. He didn't say a word unless they looked to him for backup. Karen seemed impressed. "You two have clearly been doing your homework." "We have," Sienna said, "and we want to make sure we're delivering what you need." "So far, so good," Karen replied. "I'll be honest, I wasn't sure about this at first, but I'm starting to see the value again." After the call ended, Malik turned to Ethan. "That felt good." "It should. You earned it." Sienna was quieter. "What if we'd screwed it up? Then we would have fixed it," Ethan said. "But you didn't. You were prepared, you listened, and you adapted. That's all you can do." She nodded slowly. "When do we get to lead something bigger?" Ethan smiled. "Soon." A month passed, then another. The mentorship program started to take real shape. Sienna and Malik were handling more projects independently. Ethan was still involved, still guiding, but he wasn't carrying everything anymore. And slowly, the company started to notice. Patricia stopped by Ethan's desk one afternoon. "I've been watching what you're doing with Sienna and Malik." "And?" "It's working. I wasn't sure it would, but it is. They're good people. They just needed someone to invest in them." "Not everyone can do what you're doing," Patricia said. "Teaching isn't the same as doing." "I'm learning that." She smiled. "Keep it up. The board's paying attention." A week later, Ethan was in a meeting with Dennis when the COO brought up the mentorship program unprompted. "I've been getting feedback from the department heads," Dennis said. "They're noticing a difference. People are saying Sienna and Malik are stepping up in ways they hadn't before." "They're ready for more," Ethan said. "Good. Because we've got a project coming up that I think they should lead." "What kind of project?" Dennis pulled up a file on his laptop. "We're renegotiating a major contract with Wellstone Corp. It's been a problem account for 6 months. The client's unhappy, the revenue's at risk, and we need someone who can rebuild the relationship." "That's a big ask." "I know, but if they can pull it off, it'll prove they're ready for the next level." Ethan thought about it. Wellstone was a tough client, but it was also exactly the kind of challenge Sienna and Malik needed. "Let me talk to them," Ethan said. "If they're up for it, we'll make it work." He brought it up in their next session. Sienna and Malik both looked nervous when he explained the situation. "That's a lot of pressure. Sienna said. It is, but you're ready. What if we're not? Malik asked. Then I'll be there to back you up, but you won't fail. I've seen what you can do. They looked at each other, then Sienna nodded. All right, let's do it. Malik grinned. Yeah, let's do it. Over the next 3 weeks, Ethan worked with them to prepare for the Wellstone negotiation. They researched the client's pain points, analyzed the contract terms, built a strategy that addressed the client's concerns without giving away too much. When the meeting finally came, Ethan sat in the back of the room and let them lead. The client, a hard-edged executive named Tom Garrett, didn't make it easy. I'm not interested in excuses, Tom said early in the meeting. I'm interested in results, and so far you haven't delivered. Sienna didn't flinch. You're right, we haven't, and that's on us, but we're here to fix it. How? She walked him through their proposal. It was thorough, specific, and addressed every issue Tom had raised in previous meetings. Malik backed her up with data, showing how the changes would impact Tom's bottom line. By the end of the meeting, Tom was nodding. This is better than anything your team's shown me in 6 months. We're just getting started, Malik said. Tom smiled faintly. All right, let's see if you can follow through. After the meeting, Sienna let out a long breath. That was intense. You handled it, Ethan said. We almost lost him in the first 5 minutes. But you didn't. You held your ground, and you showed him you were serious. That's what mattered. Malik leaned back in his chair. I can't believe that actually worked. It worked because you were prepared, and because you didn't panic. Sienna looked at Ethan. You didn't say anything the entire time. I didn't need to. You had it covered. She smiled. That's the first time I've felt like I actually knew what I was doing. Get used to it, Ethan said, because this is what the job looks like when you're good at it. By month 6, Sienna and Malik were leading projects regularly. Ethan was still involved, still advising, but he wasn't the one doing the heavy lifting anymore, and the company was noticing. Vivian called him into her office one afternoon. I've been hearing good things. About what? About you, about Sienna and Malik, about the whole program. They're doing the work. I'm just pointing them in the right direction. That's more than most people can do. She leaned back in her chair. The board wants an update. They want to see how the mentorship's progressing. When? Next month? Can you put something together? Yeah, I can do that. He spent the next few weeks building a progress report. He documented the projects Sienna and Malik had led, the results they'd achieved, the feedback they'd received from clients and department heads. He included metrics, revenue saved, contracts renewed, crises averted. By the time he was done, he had a 20-page report that told a story. Not just about what he'd done, but about what Sienna and Malik were becoming. The board meeting was scheduled for a Friday afternoon. Ethan walked in with Sienna and Malik at his side. This time, Richard wasn't there. Vivian had mentioned he was traveling for business. Ethan didn't know if that was true or if Richard was just avoiding the meeting. Either way, it made things easier. Vivian opened the meeting. Ethan, why don't you walk us through the update? Ethan stood and handed out copies of the report. Then he started talking. He walked them through the timeline, the projects, the results. He highlighted Sienna's work on Dover Industries and Malik's handling of the Wellstone negotiation. 6 months ago, Ethan said, these two were talented but untested. Today, they're leading some of our most important accounts. And they're doing it well. Patricia flipped through the report. These numbers are impressive. They are. And they're sustainable, because Sienna and Malik aren't just following a playbook. They're learning how to think. Dennis looked at Sienna and Malik. How do you two feel about the program? Sienna spoke first. It's been challenging, but it's also been the most valuable experience I've had here. Same, Malik said. Ethan doesn't just tell us what to do. He makes us figure it out, and that's harder, but it sticks. Gerald nodded. That's good to hear. Michelle looked at Ethan. What's the plan for the next 6 months? More of the same. Sienna and Malik take on bigger projects with less oversight. By month 12, they're running major accounts independently. By month 18, I'm fully transitioned out of operations. And you're comfortable with that timeline? Patricia asked. I am, because by then they'll be ready, and the company will be better for it. The meeting ended 30 minutes later. The board seemed satisfied. Vivian walked Ethan out. That went well, she said. It did. You've proven your point, Ethan. You said you could do this, and you're doing it. We're halfway there. The hard part's still coming. Which is? Letting go. She looked at him. You'll figure it out. As the months rolled on, Ethan started to feel the shift. Sienna and Malik were taking over more and more of the work. They were making decisions without consulting him first. They were handling crises on their own, and Ethan found himself with more free time than he'd had in years. At first, it felt strange, like something was missing, but slowly, he started to adjust. He started coming home at reasonable hours. He started having dinner with Chloe more often. He started sleeping better. One night, Chloe asked him how things were going. Good, he said. Weird, but good. Weird how? I'm not working as much, and I don't know what to do with myself. She laughed. Most people would kill for that problem. I know, but it feels like I'm supposed to be doing something, and I'm not. Maybe that's the point, she said. Maybe you're supposed to let other people do the work now. He thought about that. When did you get so wise? I've always been wise. You're just finally listening. By month 12, Sienna and Malik were leading major accounts without any input from Ethan. They'd taken over the Dover relationship completely. They'd closed the Wellstone deal and turned it into one of the company's top revenue sources. They'd even started mentoring junior staff themselves. Ethan watched from a distance, stepping in only when they asked for help, and more often than not, they didn't ask. One afternoon, Sienna stopped by his desk. Can I talk to you for a minute? Of course. They walked to an empty conference room. Sienna closed the door and sat down. I wanted to say thank you, she said. For what? For giving me a chance, for teaching me things I didn't even know I needed to learn, for not giving up on this when it would have been easier to just walk away. Ethan smiled. You earned it. Maybe, but you made it possible. You and Malik did the work. I just pointed you in the right direction. She shook her head. It was more than that. You believed in us before we believed in ourselves, and that mattered. Ethan didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded. I'm going to keep working hard, Sienna said. I'm going to make sure this company doesn't regret keeping you around long enough to teach us. You already have. She stood and left. Ethan sat there for a long time, staring at the empty chair across from him. He'd built something, not just a mentorship program, a legacy, and for the first time in months, he felt like maybe he'd made the right choice. Month 15 came faster than Ethan expected. He was barely involved in day-to-day operations anymore. Sienna and Malik were running things. Vivian had started bringing them into executive meetings. The company had fully embraced them as the future, and Ethan was okay with that. One Friday afternoon, he was cleaning out his desk when Richard Crane walked by. They hadn't spoken much since the board meeting a year ago. Richard had been busy with other projects, other initiatives, but now he stopped and looked at Ethan. Heard you're transitioning out soon, Richard said. In a few months. Yeah. Richard nodded slowly. I was wrong about you. Ethan looked up. What? I thought you were holding on for the wrong reasons. I thought you were just afraid of becoming irrelevant. Richard paused. But you weren't. You were trying to do it right. Ethan didn't respond. He didn't know what to say. Sienna and Malik are good, Richard continued. Really good. And that's because of you. They did the work. Yeah. But you taught them how. Richard looked uncomfortable, like he wasn't used to admitting he was wrong. I should have listened to you from the start. Maybe. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm just saying I was wrong. Ethan set down the stack of papers he'd been holding. I appreciate that. Richard nodded. Then he walked away. Ethan watched him go, feeling something loosen in his chest. It wasn't closure exactly, but it was close. That night he got home and found Chloe waiting for him with Chinese takeout. What's this? He asked. Celebration dinner. For what? For you not quitting, for you fighting, for you proving everyone wrong. He smiled. I didn't prove everyone wrong. You proved the people who mattered wrong. That's enough. She handed him a plate. Come on, let's eat. They sat at the kitchen table, eating lo mein and talking about her college plans. She'd gotten into her top choice. She was leaving in the fall. And Ethan was starting to realize that just like the company, She didn't need him as much anymore. "You're going to be okay without me," he said. She looked at him. "I know. I mean it. You're ready. So are you." He thought about that. She was right. He was ready. Ready to let go. Ready to step back. Ready to trust that the things he'd built would keep standing after he was gone. By month 18, the transition was complete. Sienna and Malik had taken over every major account. They were leading departments. They were making decisions that shaped the company's future. And Ethan was officially in an advisory role. He came into the office twice a week now, mostly to answer questions or provide context on old projects. The rest of the time, he was home. He was reading books he'd been putting off for years. He was going to Chloe's soccer games without checking his phone every 5 minutes. He was learning how to live a life that wasn't defined by work. It was strange, but it was also good. One afternoon, Vivian called him into her office. "I wanted to show you something." She pulled up a spreadsheet on her screen. "This is the company's revenue over the last 18 months. Ethan looked at the numbers. They were up, significantly. "That's impressive." "It is, and a lot of it is because of Sienna and Malik. They've closed deals, saved accounts, and brought in new business at a rate that's exceeded every projection we had. They're good at what they do, because you taught them." Vivian closed the laptop. "The board wanted me to thank you, officially." "For what?" "For not giving up, for fighting for something that mattered, for proving that experience and mentorship still have value." Ethan smiled. "I didn't do it for the board." "I know, but they wanted you to know anyway." He left her office feeling lighter than he had in months. He walked through the building one last time, past the conference rooms where he'd fought battles, past the desks where he'd spent decades solving problems, past the break room where Richard had first smiled at him like a predator sizing up prey. And he realized something. He'd won. Not because he'd kept his job, not because he'd outlasted Richard, but because he'd built something that would last after he was gone. That evening, he picked Chloe up from soccer practice. She tossed her bag in the back seat and climbed in, face flushed and sweaty. "Good practice?" he asked. "Great practice. Coach says I'm starting next game." "That's my girl." They drove home in comfortable silence. When they pulled into the driveway, Chloe turned to him. "You look happy," she said. "I am." "Good. You should be." He looked at her, this kid who'd somehow become wiser than him, and felt a surge of gratitude so strong it almost hurt. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For reminding me to fight, for not letting me give up." She smiled. "That's what I'm here for." They went inside. Ethan made dinner. Chloe did homework at the kitchen table. And for the first time in a very long time, everything felt right. 6 months after the transition, Ethan walked into the office on a Tuesday morning and realized he didn't belong there anymore. Not in a bad way, just in the way that meant the work had moved on without him, the way it was supposed to. He'd been coming in once a week now, mostly out of habit. Sienna and Malik ran the operations meetings. They handled the client escalations. They made the calls that used to keep Ethan up at night, and they did it well. He poured himself coffee in the break room and stood by the window, watching people move through the building. Younger faces, faster energy. A company that looked different than the one he'd joined 24 years ago. Sienna found him there. "Morning? Morning? You're here early." "Couldn't sleep." She leaned against the counter. "Everything okay?" "Yeah, just thinking." "About?" He turned to face her. "About whether I'm still needed here." She didn't answer right away. She just looked at him with that thoughtful expression she got when she was working through something complicated. "You want the honest answer?" she asked. "Always." "We don't need you the way we used to. We can run things without you now." She paused. "But that doesn't mean you're not needed." "What's the difference?" "We don't need you to save us anymore. We need you to remind us why we're doing this in the first place." He smiled faintly. "When did you get so philosophical?" "I learned from the best." They stood there for a moment in comfortable silence. Then Sienna's phone buzzed. She glanced at it and sighed. "I've got a call in 5 minutes. Client's unhappy about something." "You know how to handle it?" "I think so, but I might call you later if I need a gut check." "I'll be around." She left. Ethan stayed by the window, sipping his coffee and thinking about what she'd said. She was right. The company didn't need him to survive anymore. But maybe that had never been the point. Maybe the point was teaching people how to survive without you, so when you finally stepped away, the things you cared about didn't fall apart. That afternoon, Vivian called him into her office. She looked tired. There were files stacked on her desk, and her computer screen was filled with spreadsheets. "You look busy," Ethan said. "Always." She gestured to the chair. "Sit." He sat. "I wanted to talk to you about something," she said. "The board's been discussing succession planning again. Not for you this time, for me." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "You thinking about leaving?" "Not yet, but eventually. And when I do, I want to make sure we do it right." She leaned back in her chair. "I've been watching what you built with Sienna and Malik, the mentorship model, the knowledge transfer. It works, and I want to scale it across the entire company." "That's ambitious." "It is. But if we don't, we're going to lose decades of institutional knowledge every time someone retires. And we can't afford that." "What do you need from me?" "I want you to design the program, build the framework, train the trainers, make it something that lasts." Ethan thought about it. It was more work than he'd planned on taking, but it was also the kind of work that mattered. "How long are we talking?" 6 months to build it, another 6 to implement it. After that, it runs itself. "And then?" "And then you're done. Really done. You can walk away knowing you left something behind that's bigger than any one project or account." He nodded slowly. "All right, I'm in." Vivian smiled. "Good, because I wasn't taking no for an answer." Over the next few weeks, Ethan threw himself into the new project. He interviewed department heads, analyzed where knowledge gaps existed, identified people who had the skills to mentor but had never been asked to. He built a curriculum that wasn't just about technical skills, but about judgment, instinct, and how to navigate the invisible dynamics that made or broke careers. Malik helped him structure the program. Sienna helped him test it with a pilot group, and slowly, the framework took shape. One evening, Ethan was working late when Patricia stopped by his desk. "Still here?" she asked. "Finishing something." She sat down in the chair across from him. "I heard about the new program. Vivian's excited about it." "It's coming together." "You know what's funny?" Patricia said. "A year and a half ago, Richard was trying to push you out because he thought you were a liability. And now you're designing the system that's going to define how this company develops talent for the next decade." Ethan set down his pen. "Life's weird that way." "It is." She paused. "I never told you this, but I voted for you in that first board meeting because I thought you were right. But I also voted for you because I thought Richard was being an idiot." Ethan laughed. "I appreciate the honesty. He's not a bad guy. He was just wrong. And he was too proud to admit it until it was almost too late." "He admitted it eventually?" "Because you forced him to." Patricia stood. "Anyway, I just wanted to say I'm glad you didn't give up." "Me too." She left. Ethan went back to his work, but her words stayed with him. He'd spent so much time fighting to stay relevant that he'd almost missed the bigger picture. This wasn't just about him. It was about building something that would help people long after he was gone. By the time he finished the framework, it was nearly midnight. He saved the document, closed his laptop, and drove home through empty streets. When he walked in, Chloe was still awake, sitting on the couch with her laptop. "You're up late," he said. "So are you." "Fair point." He sat down next to her. "What are you working on?" "Scholarship essay. It's due tomorrow." "You need help?" "No, I'm almost done." She glanced at him. "You look exhausted." "I am." "Then why are you still working?" "Because it matters." She smiled. "You say that about everything." "Not everything. Just the things that actually matter." She closed her laptop and turned to face him. "You know what I've been thinking about?" "What?" "How different you are now than you were a year ago." "Different how?" "A year ago, you looked like you were just trying to survive. Now you look like you're actually building something." He thought about that. She was right. A year ago, he'd been fighting just to keep his job. Now he was fighting to leave something behind that would outlast him. "You're very observant," he said. "I've had a good teacher." "Who, me?" "Yeah, you." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "I'm proud of you, Dad." His throat tightened. "Thank you." They sat there in silence for a while, and Ethan realized that this was what winning actually looked like. Not a board meeting or a promotion or a victory over Richard Crane. Just a quiet moment with his daughter, knowing that she'd learned something valuable by watching him fight for what mattered. The next 6 months moved quickly. Ethan launched the mentorship program with a pilot group of 20 people. Some were senior employees who'd never been asked to teach. Others were mid-level staff who had the potential to lead but needed guidance. He paired them carefully, matching experience with ambition, patience with hunger. The results were immediate. People who'd felt overlooked suddenly had purpose. People who'd been stuck in their roles suddenly saw a path forward, and the company started to shift in ways that were hard to quantify but easy to feel. One afternoon, Ethan was leading a training session when Richard Crane walked in and sat in the back of the room. Ethan noticed but didn't acknowledge him. He kept teaching, kept walking the group through a case study about how to handle a client crisis. When the session ended, Richard approached him. "That was good," Richard said. "Thanks." "I mean it. You've built something real here." Ethan packed up his materials. "It's not just me. A lot of people contributed. But you're the one who made it happen." Richard hesitated. "I wanted to ask you something." "Go ahead." "Do you think I could sit in on a few more of these sessions? I'd like to learn how you're structuring it." Ethan looked at him. A year ago, he would have been suspicious. Now he just saw someone who was genuinely trying to learn. "Yeah, you're welcome any time," Richard nodded. "I appreciate that." He left. Ethan watched him go, feeling something shift. The war was over. Not because someone had won or lost, but because both of them had grown past the need to fight. By month 10, the mentorship program was running across the entire company. Vivian presented the results to the board, and the feedback was overwhelmingly positive. Retention was up, employee engagement was up, and the company was developing leaders faster than it ever had before. Ethan sat in the back of the boardroom during the presentation, listening to Vivian talk about the program like it was the most natural thing in the world, like it had always been there. And in a way, maybe it had. Maybe all he'd done was give form to something the company had needed all along. After the meeting, Gerald pulled him aside. "I wanted to thank you," Gerald said. "When we voted to extend your timeline 18 months ago, I wasn't sure it was the right call. But you proved us right. I just did what I said I would. Most people don't. That's what makes you different." Ethan didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded. As he walked out of the building that evening, he realized his time was almost up. Another 2 months, and the program would be fully implemented. After that, there was nothing left for him to do. He'd taught everything he knew. He'd built everything he could build, and the company was ready to move forward without him. That night, Chloe asked him what was next. "What do you mean?" he asked. "After you're done with the program, what are you going to do?" "I don't know yet. You should figure it out, because you're not the kind of person who does well with nothing to do." She was right. He'd spent his entire adult life working. The idea of not having a purpose, not having a mission, was almost terrifying. "I'll figure something out," he said. "You better. Because if you turn into one of those retired guys who just sits around complaining about everything, I'm disowning you." He laughed. "Noted." 2 months later, Ethan walked into the office for what he knew would be one of his last times. The mentorship program was fully operational. Sienna and Malik were thriving. The company was stronger than it had been in years, and Ethan was finally, truly, ready to let go. Vivian called him into her office one last time. "So this is it," she said. "Looks like it. How do you feel?" He thought about it. Relieved, proud, a little scared. Scared of what? Of not knowing what comes next. She smiled. "You'll figure it out. You always do." "I hope so." She stood and walked around her desk. "I wanted to give you something." She handed him an envelope. Inside was a letter from the board, thanking him for his contributions and outlining a consulting agreement if he ever wanted to come back and advise on special projects. "You don't have to take it," Vivian said, "but it's there if you want it. Thank you. And one more thing." She pulled out another document. "The board voted to name the mentorship program after you. The Cole Leadership Development Program." Ethan stared at the paper. His name, his legacy, permanent. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything. You earned it." He left her office feeling like he was walking on air. He walked through the building one last time, said goodbye to the people he'd worked with for decades, hugged Sienna and Malik, and then walked out the front doors into the late afternoon sunlight. Chloe was waiting for him in the parking lot, leaning against his car. "How'd it go?" she asked. "It went." "Are you okay?" "I think so." She studied his face. "You don't look okay." "I feel like I just closed a chapter of my life and I don't know what the next one looks like." "That's because you haven't started writing it yet." He smiled. "When did you get so smart?" "I keep telling you, I've always been smart." They got in the car and drove home. Chloe talked about her plans for college, about the classes she was excited to take, about the future she was building, and Ethan listened, realizing that she'd learned the most important lesson he could have taught her, that your value isn't defined by what other people think of you. It's defined by what you build, what you stand for, and whether you have the courage to fight for it when it matters. A month later, Ethan got a call from a university. They'd heard about the mentorship program he'd built and wanted to know if he'd be interested in teaching a course on leadership and organizational development. He almost said no, but then he thought about Chloe's words, about not knowing what comes next until you start writing it, so he said yes. The course was harder than he expected. The students were sharp, challenging, unwilling to accept easy answers, but it was also the most rewarding thing he'd done in years. He wasn't just teaching them theory, he was teaching them how to think, how to lead, how to navigate the messy reality of organizational life. One student, a young woman named Maria, stayed after class one day. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Of course. How do you know when it's time to fight for something and when it's time to let it go?" Ethan thought about it. You fight when the thing you're fighting for is bigger than you. When it's about principles, about people, about leaving something behind that matters. You let go when you're just fighting to hold on to something that's already gone. She nodded slowly. "That makes sense." "Why do you ask?" "Because I'm dealing with something at my internship. My boss wants to change the way we do things, and I think it's a mistake, but I don't know if it's worth fighting over." "What do you think will happen if you don't fight?" "The work will get worse, people will get frustrated, but I'll stay out of trouble." "And if you do fight?" "Maybe things get better. Maybe they don't. But at least I'll know I tried." Ethan smiled. "Then you already know the answer." She smiled back. "Thanks." After she left, Ethan sat in the empty classroom thinking about how many times he'd faced that same question, how many times he'd had to decide whether to fight or let go. And he realized that the answer was never easy, but it was always worth asking. 6 months into teaching, Ethan got a call from Richard Crane. "I heard you're teaching now," Richard said. "I am." "How's it going?" "Better than I expected." "I'm glad." Richard paused. "I wanted to let you know something. I'm leaving the company." Ethan was surprised. "Really?" "Yeah. I got an offer to run operations at another firm. Bigger role, more responsibility." "Congratulations." "Thanks. But before I go, I wanted to say something." "All right." "I was wrong about you, and I'm sorry it took me so long to say it." Ethan leaned back in his chair. "I appreciate that. You taught me something, Ethan. You taught me that there's a difference between being efficient and being effective, and that sometimes the old way is the old way for a reason." "I didn't teach you that, you learned it." Richard laughed. "Maybe. Either way, I'm grateful." They talked for a few more minutes, and when the call ended, Ethan felt something settle that he hadn't even realized was still unsettled. Forgiveness wasn't about forgetting what happened. It was about letting go of the need for the other person to suffer for it. A year after leaving the company, Ethan was having coffee with Patricia when she brought up the mentorship program. "It's still going strong," she said. "We've trained over 200 people now, and the model you built is being adopted by other companies." "That's good to hear." "It's more than good. It's your legacy." Ethan looked out the window. "I don't know if I think of it that way." "How do you think of it?" "I think of it as the thing I did when I finally stopped worrying about whether I mattered and started focusing on making sure other people knew they mattered." Patricia smiled. "That's exactly what a legacy is." They finished their coffee and said goodbye. As Ethan walked to his car, he thought about everything that had happened over the last 2 years. The fight to keep his job, the battle with Richard, the mentorship program, the transition, the teaching. And he realized something. Winning wasn't about defeating the people who tried to push you out. It wasn't about proving you were indispensable. It was about building something that lasted after you were gone. About teaching people that their value wasn't tied to their title or their tenure, but to what they contributed and how they treated others. That evening, he drove to Chloe's college to pick her up for winter break. She ran out of her dorm with her bags, looking older, more confident, more herself than she'd ever been. "Hey, Dad." "Hey, kiddo." She threw her bags in the trunk and climbed in. "How have you been?" "Good. Busy." "With what?" "Teaching, consulting, figuring out what retirement actually means." She laughed. "You're terrible at retirement." "I know." They drove for a while in comfortable silence. Then Chloe said, "You know what I've been thinking about?" "What?" "How you almost gave up 2 years ago. How close you came to just letting them push you out." "I remember." "I'm glad you didn't." "Me too." "Because if you had, I wouldn't have learned the most important thing you ever taught me." He glanced at her. "What's that?" "That your value isn't something other people give you. It's something you create. And if you stop creating it, that's when you actually become irrelevant." Ethan felt his throat tighten. "You learned that from watching me?" "I learned that from watching you fight, from watching you refuse to disappear just because someone thought you should." He didn't trust himself to speak, so he just nodded. They drove home through the darkening evening, and Ethan thought about everything he'd gained and everything he'd lost. He'd given up the daily grind, the constant pressure, the feeling of being essential to every decision, but he'd gained something more valuable. He'd gained the knowledge that he'd built something that mattered, that he'd left the company better than he'd found it, and that his daughter had learned what it meant to stand up for yourself when the world tried to tell you to sit down. A few weeks later, Ethan got an email from Sienna. She and Malik had been promoted to senior leadership positions. They were running entire divisions now, shaping the company's future in ways Ethan had only imagined. At the bottom of the email was a note. "Thank you for believing in us when no one else did. We wouldn't be here without you." Ethan read it twice. Then he closed his laptop and went outside. It was a cold January morning, the kind where the air hurt your lungs, but the sky was so clear it almost hurt to look at. He stood in his driveway, hands in his pockets, thinking about the last 2 years, about the fight, about the victory, about what it meant to leave a legacy. And he realized that the most important battles weren't the ones you fought for yourself. They were the ones you fought so that other people wouldn't have to, so that the next person facing down a Richard Crane would know it was possible to win, so that the next Sienna or Malik would have someone willing to invest in them. That was the real victory. Not survival, not revenge, but transformation. Taking something broken and making it whole, taking something unfair and making it just, taking something that almost destroyed you and turning it into the foundation for something better. A car pulled up. It was Chloe, home from a study session with friends. She got out and walked over to him. "What are you doing out here?" she asked. "Just thinking." "About what?" "About how things turned out." She stood next to him, following his gaze across the empty street. "You happy with how they turned out?" He thought about it. Not about the board meetings or the promotions or the program that bore his name, but about the people. Sienna and Malik building careers they'd almost been denied. The students in his class learning to fight for what mattered. Chloe growing into someone who understood that dignity wasn't given, it was claimed. "Yeah," he said. "I am." She smiled. "Good." They stood there for a moment longer, father and daughter, both of them older and wiser and scarred in the ways that come from actually living instead of just surviving. Then Chloe said, "You know what the best part is?" "What?" "You didn't just save your job. You changed how the whole company thinks about people like you, about experience, about what it means to be valuable." He looked at her. "That's a pretty big claim." "It's true, though. Patricia told me. She said other companies are copying what you built, that it's becoming an industry standard." Ethan didn't know what to say to that. He'd never set out to change an industry. He'd just been trying to survive. But maybe that was how real change happened, not through grand plans or noble intentions, but through one person deciding they weren't going to accept the way things were and fighting, day after day, to make them better. "Come on," Chloe said. "It's freezing out here." They went inside. Ethan made dinner while Chloe set the table. They ate together, talking about nothing and everything. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, Ethan felt completely at peace. Not because everything was perfect. It wasn't. Not because all his problems were solved. They weren't. But because he'd learned something that most people never learn, that your worth isn't measured by how long you last or how much you produce. It's measured by what you leave behind when you're gone. And Ethan had left behind something that would outlast him, a program that would train thousands of people, a model that would reshape how companies thought about mentorship and succession, and a daughter who understood that the most important thing in life wasn't avoiding the fight. It was choosing the right battles and seeing them through to the end. That night, after Chloe went to bed, Ethan sat at his desk and pulled out a notebook. He started writing, not about the past, not about the fight with Richard or the board meetings or the promotions, but about the future, about the things he wanted to teach, about the lessons he'd learned, about what it meant to build a life that mattered. He wrote until his hand cramped and his eyes burned. And when he finally stopped, he looked at the pages in front of him and realized he'd just started writing the next chapter, not of his career, but of his life. Because the thing about winning wasn't that the fight ended. It was that you finally understood what you'd been fighting for all along. Not survival, not recognition, but the chance to leave the world a little better than you found it. To teach people that they had value even when others couldn't see it. To show your daughter that standing up for yourself wasn't selfish, it was necessary. Ethan closed the notebook and turned off the light. As he walked to his bedroom, he passed Chloe's door and heard her breathing, steady and peaceful. And he thought about everything she'd taught him over the last 2 years. About courage, about resilience, about refusing to let other people write your ending. He thought he was teaching her, but the truth was, they'd been teaching each other. And in the end, that was the lesson worth learning. That value isn't something you prove once and carry forever. It's something you build every single day, through the choices you make and the people you invest in, and the willingness to fight for what matters even when the odds are stacked against you. Ethan Cole had spent 24 years holding a company together, but in the last 2 years, he'd done something more important. He'd taught people how to hold themselves together, how to stand tall when the world tried to make them small, how to turn survival into legacy. And that was victory. Not the kind that came with fanfare or applause, but the quiet kind. The kind that lived in the hearts of the people you'd helped. The kind that lasted long after you were gone. As Ethan climbed into bed that night, he smiled. Because for the first time in his life, he understood what it meant to truly win. Not by defeating your enemies, but by making sure that when you left, the people who came after you were stronger, wiser, and more capable than you'd ever been. That was legacy. That was purpose. That was everything that mattered. And Ethan Cole had built it, one hard choice at a time, until the day he finally walked away knowing he'd left something behind worth remembering.